The morning I signed the divorce papers, I wore my good blazer. Not because I wanted to look nice for the occasion. Not because I cared what anyone in that courthouse thought of me. I wore it because my mother bought it for me 12 years ago, right before I started at Hartwell Financial Group, and she told me the same thing she always said when I was nervous. Stand up straight, Vivian. You're a Hartwell, act like it. So I did. I stood up straight. I signed my name, Vivian Hartwell Crane, for the last time, on the line my attorney pointed to, and I did not cry. I had already done all my crying. I had done it alone in the upstairs bathroom of the house I grew up in, 3 weeks earlier, sitting on the cold tile floor with my back against the bathtub, my mother knocking softly from the other side of the door, asking if I wanted tea. I told her I was fine. She didn't believe me, but she didn't push. That was the agreement we had. My attorney, a small, precise woman named Janet who had handled my grandfather's estate and my parents' wills and now this, slid the folder closed and looked at me over her reading glasses. That's everything, she said. I nodded. I picked up my bag. I walked out of the conference room through the lobby where the morning light came through the tall windows and long rectangles across the marble floor, and I stepped outside into the October air. Then I called my father. He picked up on the second ring. It's done, I said. A pause. Then, come to the office. My husband, my ex-husband, was a man named Grant Crane. I met him 11 years ago at a charity fundraiser my father's company sponsored every fall. He was charming in the way that certain men are charming, attentive, funny, a little self-deprecating in exactly the right doses. He remembered small things. He sent flowers without being asked. He made my father laugh, which was not easy to do, and he made my mother feel like the most interesting woman in any room, which was easy to do because she was. We got married 3 years after we met, in the garden of my parents' house in Plano. It was small. 80 people. White flowers. No theme, no fuss. My father walked me down the aisle and I could see he was proud and trying not to show it, which was how he showed everything. What I did not know then, what I would not understand for years, was that Grant had been paying attention to more than just me. Hartwell Financial Group had been in my family for 2 generations. My grandfather started it as a small accounting firm in Dallas in 1971. My father built it into a regional financial planning and investment management company with offices in 3 states. He had worked his entire life for that company. He had sacrificed his Saturdays and his vacations and occasionally his health for that company. When I was 12, I used to sit in the chair across from his desk on Saturday mornings, doing my homework, just to spend time with him. I started there officially when I was 27, in a junior analyst role because my father refused to let me skip the ladder. You'll resent the shortcut later, he told me. Earn it. I did. I worked my way up over 8 years. When Grant and I got married, I was director of client relations. By the time our marriage started quietly falling apart, I was vice president of operations. Grant worked in commercial real estate. He had his own firm, small but profitable, and he was good at what he did. He was good at reading people. He was good at knowing what someone wanted before they said it out loud. Turns out that skill works in multiple directions. About 2 years into our marriage, my father asked Grant if he would consult on the company's office expansion. We were looking at leasing new space in Fort Worth and Austin, and Grant knew those markets well. It made sense at the time. It seemed like a natural collaboration. That was the door I held open for him. What Grant did with that door, quietly and methodically over the next 6 years, I didn't understand until after he left. I needed to back up. The marriage didn't end all at once. That's not how these things work, or at least it wasn't for us. It unraveled the way a sweater does. One loose thread, then another, and you keep pulling without realizing what you're pulling apart. The first thread was small. Grant came home later than he said he would. Not once, regularly, he had explanations. Meetings ran long, a client dinner, traffic on 75. They were reasonable explanations and I accepted them because I was tired too, because I was managing a team of 14 people and dealing with my own late nights, and because believing the reasonable explanation was easier than the alternative. The second thread, his phone, face down on the kitchen counter. Always face down now. The third thread, a name, Stephanie, a colleague, he said. A friend of a colleague. I don't remember which version came first. I am not going to give the infidelity more of my story than it deserves. What I will say is this. I found out the way most people find out, which is to say I wasn't looking for it, and then suddenly it was right in front of me and I could not pretend I hadn't seen it. A text message on a Tuesday night. He had left his phone on the bathroom counter, face up for once, and it lit up, and I saw her name, and I saw enough. I confronted him that night. He didn't deny it. He was almost relieved, I think. He said things that people say in those moments, that he was sorry, that it had been going on for 8 months, that he hadn't meant for any of it to happen. That phrase. Hadn't meant for it to happen. As if he had simply tripped and fallen into another woman's life by accident. I told him to leave. He left. What happened in the weeks that followed, I was not prepared for. My mother-in-law, Grant's mother, a woman named Roberta Crane, called me 4 days after Grant moved out. I had not spoken to her since the night I found out. I had not spoken to much of anyone. I was functioning. I was going to work and coming home and eating whatever was easiest and sleeping badly, and starting over the next morning. Roberta did not call to apologize for her son. She called to negotiate. "I think we need to talk about what happens next," she said. Her voice was the same voice she always had, measured, a little cool, the voice of someone who had spent 40 years managing situations. "There's nothing to talk about," I said. "Grant and I are separating. The attorneys will handle it." "I'm not talking about the separation," she said. "I'm talking about the business." I didn't understand what she meant, not yet. "Grant has been instrumental in the company's growth," she said. "His consulting relationships, the lease negotiations, the Fort Worth build-out, the Austin office. He put years into this. He was paid for his consulting work," I said. "Vivian." Her voice shifted just slightly. "You need to understand what Grant is owed." That was when I felt it. That particular cold feeling that starts at the back of your neck and moves down slowly. Not quite fear, something adjacent to it. "I'll have my attorney call his attorney," I said, and I ended the call. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time after that. Then I called Janet. What Janet found, when she started pulling at the threads of Grant's 6 years of involvement with Hartwell Financial Group, took 3 weeks and a forensic accountant. I am going to try to explain this clearly. When Grant consulted on the Fort Worth lease, he had negotiated on our behalf with the property management company. What he had not disclosed was that he had a financial interest in that property management company. A silent partnership arrangement he had entered 18 months before the lease negotiation began. We had paid above market rate on a 5-year lease, and a percentage of that premium had flowed indirectly back to a holding company Grant controlled through a third-party LLC. The Austin office was similar, with a different property, a different LLC, and a slightly more complex structure. There were also 2 vendor contracts, IT infrastructure and building security, that Grant had recommended and that Hartwell had executed, both with companies that, when you followed the corporate filings far enough, traced back to people Grant was in business with. Referral arrangements that were never disclosed. In total, Janet and the forensic accountant calculated that Grant had extracted approximately $340,000 from Hartwell Financial Group over 6 years through these arrangements. Not embezzlement in the most direct sense. He had never stolen a check. He had engineered situations in which the company paid above what it should have, and he had positioned himself to collect the difference. It was meticulous. It was patient. And if the marriage had continued, if I had never found out about Stephanie, if Grant had never needed to leave, I don't know that we ever would have found it. Janet laid it out for me at her desk on a Thursday afternoon. She did it calmly and methodically, the way she did everything. When she finished, she folded her hands and looked at me. "This is actionable," she said. "Breach of fiduciary duty, fraud. Depending on how the DA's office wants to approach it, potentially wire fraud given the electronic transfers." I looked at the papers in front of me. At the diagrams Janet's paralegal had made, boxes connected by arrows, names of LLCs I had never heard of. "My father doesn't know," I said. "No," Janet said, "not yet." I drove directly from Janet's office to Hartwell Financial Group. It was 4:30 in the afternoon. My father was in his office. He was always in his office. And I walked in and closed the door and sat down across from him. I told him everything. He listened without interrupting. My father always listened without interrupting. He had a legal pad on his desk and he made small notes as I talked, the scratch of his pen the only sound in the room. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Get the attorneys on the phone. Tonight. Here is what I want to tell you about my father-in-law, Grant's father, a man named Howard Crane." Howard was on the surface an affable man. He had coached Little League for a decade. He had barbecued at every family gathering I ever attended. He had called me kiddo from the first month I dated his son. In a way, I had always found slightly patronizing but had never said so. Howard Crane was also, I would later learn, the person who had first suggested to Grant that he look more closely at the opportunities available to him as a consultant to a privately held company where his wife held a senior executive role, and his father-in-law trusted him completely. I did not know this for certain until the deposition, but I am getting ahead of myself. The first sign that the Crane family understood what was coming came 10 days after I had my conversation with my father, when Roberta showed up at my parents' house unannounced on a Saturday morning. My mother called me while I was still in bed. "Your mother-in-law is at the front door," she said, with the particular tone she reserved for situations she found absurd. I drove over. Roberta was standing in my parents' foyer when I arrived, still in her coat, her handbag held in front of her with both hands. She was a composed woman under normal circumstances, but something in her face that morning was different, tighter, controlled in a way that suggested effort. "You need to stop what you're doing," she said, before I had even sat down. "Good morning, Roberta. I'm serious, Vivian. You're making this into something it doesn't need to be." "What I'm doing," I said, "is protecting my family's company." "Grant made mistakes," she said. "He knows that. He's willing to discuss restitution. There's no need to involve law enforcement. That's not your decision to make," my father said from the doorway of the living room. I hadn't heard him come in. He stood there in his weekend clothes, a mug of coffee in his hand, and he looked at Roberta with an expression I recognized. The one he wore in difficult board meetings, when he had already decided what he was going to do, and was simply waiting for the other person to finish speaking. "Edwin," Roberta said, turning to him. "I think you should go," my father said. She left, but it wasn't over. 3 days later, Grant's attorney sent a letter to Janet proposing what they called a mutual resolution, essentially offering to repay a portion of the $340,000 in exchange for Hartwell Financial dropping any civil or criminal referral. The number they proposed returning was $85,000. Janet forwarded it to me with a single line of commentary. "Not serious. I recommend declining." We declined. 2 weeks after that, on a Wednesday evening, Howard and Roberta Crane, Grant's sister Melissa, and 2 people I didn't recognize parked 4 cars on the street in front of my parents' house in Plano and stood on the sidewalk. They held signs. Actual, physical signs, printed on foam board. They said things like "Hartwell destroyed our family," and "Vivian Crane is destroying our lives." They were there for nearly 2 hours. My mother watched from the front window. She called it deeply strange. She was not wrong. My father called the Plano police non-emergency line. Officers came, confirmed the protesters were on public property and within their rights, and suggested my parents not engage. My father thanked them. He went back inside and finished his dinner. I was not there that evening. I was at my own apartment by then, but my mother sent me a photograph of the signs. I stared at it for a long time. I thought about Grant, about 11 years, about the garden wedding and the white flowers and my father walking me down the aisle. I thought about the diagram Janet's paralegal had made, all those boxes and arrows. I thought. They knew. Maybe not all of them, maybe not every detail, but Roberta had called me 4 days after Grant left to talk about what the business owed him. She had known something. I put the phone down. I went to bed. I let my attorneys handle the morning. The civil case was filed in the first week of December. Grant's attorney filed a counterclaim in January, arguing that Grant's consulting contributions had been undervalued and that Hartwell owed him additional compensation. It was a strategy designed to complicate and delay, Janet explained, a fairly common tactic. The Texas Real Estate Commission began a separate investigation into Grant's undisclosed conflicts of interest in the lease transactions, since he held a real estate broker's license. The forensic accountant testified in deposition in February. Howard Crane was deposed in March. The deposition transcript was 47 pages. On page 12, Grant's attorney asked Howard whether he had ever discussed with Grant the financial opportunities available through the Hartwell consulting relationship. Howard said he did not recall. On page 28, Janet introduced a series of text messages between Howard and Grant from 4 years earlier. Howard's deposition ended early. "I want to tell you about a Tuesday afternoon in March, about 6 weeks before the case settled. I was at my desk at Hartwell. I had come back full-time in January, once the initial shock of everything had settled into something more like ordinary grief. And my assistant knocked and said my father wanted to see me when I had a moment. I walked down the hall to his office. He was standing at the window. He did that sometimes. stood at the window looking out over the parking lot and the strip of sky above the shopping center across the street, as if he was thinking through something complicated. He didn't turn around when I came in. "I should have looked closer," he said. I sat down. "Dad, I trusted him because you loved him. I gave him access because I thought he was family." He paused. "I should have protected the company better. He was very careful," I said. "He built it over years. There was nothing obvious to see." My father was quiet. "It wasn't your fault," I said. He turned around then. He looked at me for a moment with an expression I didn't have a name for. Not quite regret, not quite sadness, something that lived between them. "I know," he said. "But I'm still sorry." We sat together for a while after that, not talking much, just sitting the way we used to sit when I was 12 and doing homework in the chair across from his desk on Saturday mornings. The case settled in late April. Grant agreed to repay Hartwell Financial Group $290,000. The $340,000 minus documented consulting fees that Janet determined had been legitimate. The settlement included a confidentiality clause on Grant's side and a full release from Hartwell's side of any further civil claims. The Texas Real Estate Commission suspended Grant's broker's license for 3 years. The district attorney's office, after reviewing Janet's referral, declined to pursue criminal charges, citing the complexity of proving criminal intent in the LLC structure. Janet told me this was common and expected. I was disappointed but not surprised. Howard Crane faced no formal legal consequences. What he faced instead was the deposition transcript, which became part of the public court record. I will leave that where it is. Roberta sent me an email in May. It was 4 sentences long. She said that she had not known the full extent of what Grant had done. She said she was sorry for the pain it had caused my family. She said she hoped I would find peace. I read it twice. I didn't respond. I still work at Hartwell Financial Group. I was promoted to Chief Operating Officer in June. My father had been planning the transition for 2 years, he said, and the timing simply accelerated. My office is on the 3rd floor, east side, with a window that faces a courtyard where someone planted a small garden years ago, and nobody has had the heart to pull it out. There's a Bradford pear tree that goes white every spring for exactly 2 weeks, and then the petals fall and it's just a tree again. I think about the last 11 years sometimes, not the way I thought I would, not with the particular ache I expected. More like you think about a road you took that turned out to be wrong. You understand why you turned there. You understand what you were looking at when you missed the sign. And you file it away, not as regret exactly, but as knowledge. Grant is still in Dallas. I know this because Dallas is not a large city in the ways that matter. I see his name occasionally in commercial real estate filings. I do not see him. Melissa, his sister, sent me a birthday card in August. I don't know what she intended by it. I set it on my kitchen counter and I haven't thrown it away, and I'm not sure what that means either. My mother has strong opinions about what I should do next. She shares them regularly. I am 41 years old, and my mother still thinks she knows what's best for me, and the infuriating thing is that she is usually right. My father retired his coffee mug. The one he has carried around that office for as long as I can remember, the one with the chipped handle, and replaced it with a new one my niece painted for him at one of those pottery places. It has his name on it in uneven blue letters. He carries it everywhere now. There are days the building feels different to me. Lighter. Maybe. Or maybe that's just me. I signed the divorce papers on a Wednesday morning in October. In the good blazer my mother bought me, I stood up straight. I walked out into the autumn light. The road back took longer than I expected and less time than I feared. I am still walking it, but I'm walking it as a Hartwell, which is the only way I ever knew how.